What defines a great story to me is the ability to connect with the material, for the material to be transferable to your real life and affect you as a person, both in times of darkness and light. Bleach is one of these stories. The Thousand Year Blood War is full of so many deep and poignant chapters that affected me personally, and they truthfully couldn't have come at a better time in my real life. If you're new to this series, we cover Bleach from a completely blind perspective of never having read the manga or seen the anime, and since starting this journey, I've fallen in love with this dark story, and by the end of this final arc, it may just go down as my favorite story of all time. So if you haven't already, please drop a subscription and sit back and relax, because this is my blind review of Bleach. With the conclusion of the Everything But the Rain flashback, we're taken back to the current and we see Ichigo once more return to Yumiya. Yumiya, now believing Ichigo to understand himself after the events of the past day, he sends him back into his house to be surrounded by Osauchi. But things are different than before. The Osauchi aren't angry with him, they bow before Ichigo as if he's their king. Standing before an innumerable amount of jet black Osauchi, Ichigo grabs the hand of the one he knows to be his. The jet black color fades, and we see White before Ichigo, his true Osauchi. White, previously an entity that Ichigo feared to let himself be controlled by, he now bows before him, a horse to his king. Symbolically, at this moment, my suspicions regarding White's true intentions all along began to surface. Yumiya then takes Ichigo to reforge his blade, and the location to do so couldn't have been better. Right on the edge of a cliff, surrounded by water, aesthetically it fit the scene perfectly. The reforging process with the help of the Yumiya Elite Guard Squad was intricate, and watching them work was so efficient and methodical. During the process, Yumiya tells Ichigo the truth, that White is his Zanpakuto, and that the process White was created was almost identical to how he himself creates Osauchi. That White entered Ichigo's soul and fused with his Shinigami powers, and thus became his Zanpakuto. Immediately, I thought back to Ichigo facing off versus White in his inner world. White told Ichigo that he is Zangetsu, and now it finally makes sense. Him saying he's Zangetsu, White wasn't lying. At the same time I thought through this, it dawned on me my lurking suspicions due to the aesthetic of Old Man Zangetsu, and I feared what was to come. Ichigo's inner world is now immediately presented upon this realization, and Ichigo is told that the man he believes to be Old Man Zangetsu is the Quincy power within him. That Old Man Zangetsu's form is Yhwach 1,000 years ago. My god, I was freaking out reading this. These sequence of chapters are some of the best within Bleach. The Blade is Me and The Blade is Me are both symbolically so immense and groundbreaking for Ichigo as a character. These chapters are genuinely 10 out of 10. With this newfound information, Ichigo's inner world begins to break. The buildings crack, and Ichigo is submerged into the water. The inner world always reflects Ichigo's emotional state, and with this new realization, Ichigo's emotions are clearly shaken up. The man Ichigo has trusted, relied on, and looked to for advice isn't who he says he is. Rather, he has the appearance of the very man who Ichigo views as his true enemy. Ichigo asks if he's truly Yhwach, but the response is clouded. The identity of Old Man Zangetsu is that he is both Yhwach, but also not Yhwach. I struggled with that line for a while, reading it over and over again. He's clearly the Quincy power within Ichigo, and due to Quincy's all stemming from Yhwach himself, it seems that Old Man Zangetsu manifests as Yhwach and is from Yhwach, making him Yhwach, but he isn't the same conscious being as the Yhwach we know within the story. Ichigo begins to ask if he's his enemy, his ally, if everything has been a lie up until this point, and we see the despair in his face. His world is breaking. What I love about Kubo's style is the explicit expression we can see within individuals' faces. Rage, anger, sadness. They're displayed and depicted so perfectly. Old Man Zangetsu then reminds Ichigo of all the prior moments when he was saved, when he was taught how to use his Zanpakuto. All these events were White's actions. Ichigo continually has mirrored White's training throughout the story, from learning to spin his Zanpakuto to his Getsuga Tensho, even to the way he grabs Aizen's face and throws him to the side. White has always served as a teacher to Ichigo, and Ichigo has mimicked exactly the abilities and powers that White has presented. And despite appearing at first glance as a villain seeking to take over Ichigo's body, White has always been a teacher. White did all of this to make Ichigo stronger, to allow him to grow through some atypical methods. Through making Ichigo view himself as a threat, forcing Ichigo to obtain new power to retain control over his body. It was in front of us this entire time. The most beautiful part of this realization for me is the inherited will we see from Misaki. White arose within Misaki and lived side by side with her, no longer subjected to the loneliness that Hollow's face. White witnessed through the eyes of Ichigo her death, and White, with Masaki gone, carries on the maternal role of a protector that Masaki wielded. Although White lacks the gentle touch to this nature, he protects Ichigo time and time again, similarly to how Masaki would have done the same. Old Man Zangetsu then drops another bombshell, that he has been suppressing Ichigo's Shinigami powers this entire time. I had to do a double take. Ichigo, already a level of ungodly strength, has been suppressed this entire time? It made me feel immense excitement for what was to come with this power-up. Old Man Zangetsu continues his reasoning, that all along he wanted to keep Ichigo out of pain, suffering, injury. He undoubtedly knew that if he took this path of becoming a Shinigami, he'd have to one day face off versus himself within Yhwach. But despite his desires to suppress Ichigo's Shinigami powers and the path he walked, as Ichigo trudged on, Old Man Zangetsu began to embrace the path Ichigo chose. And subsequently, Old Man Zangetsu steps aside and he fades away, symbolizing the evaporation of the previous restraint on his Shinigami powers. This scene was emotional. With Old Man Zangetsu's parting words, it was truly a beautiful moment. Despite him being Ichigo's Quincy power and Old Man Zangetsu claiming not to be helping him all this time, his role isn't at all minimized. Old Man Zangetsu equally helped Ichigo in moments where he needed it most, and he's been the calm and caring mentor to Ichigo. The juxtaposition of White and Old Man Zangetsu is perfect, both yin and yang, and they're both necessary to Ichigo's development. Ichigo now uncovers his true Zanpakuto, and in the most fitting of dialogues, Ichigo recounts how he doesn't care who Old Man Zangetsu is, that both him and White are Zangetsu, and Ichigo unveils two Zanpakuto, two swords for his two Zangetsu existing within him. Our boy is wielding not just one sword, but two blades. They are about to wreak havoc on the Quincy, and I had so many chills upon this realization. Kubo couldn't have done this more perfectly. With this revelation, I feared that Old Man Zangetsu would give over control and fade out of the story, but he doesn't. Both White and Old Man Zangetsu are needed for Ichigo, both as his mentors and protectors. Ichigo has always had a mixed relationship with both Zangetsu, asking for their power, trying to suppress White. Ichigo comes to the realization that now he'll fight for himself, that these powers, these Zangetsu, they're both him. The chapter titles The Blade in Me, transitioning to The Blade is Me, is masterful storytelling. These chapters are truly some of my favorite of this story. Ichigo now embraces all aspects of himself, the Quincy, the Shinigami, the Hollow. He finally understands that the Zangetsus are part of him. He accepts himself. He accepts his power. He accepts that the blade is him. While reading these chapters, I was in a bit of a slump in real life. I was down and depressed. I had some unfortunate news. But through reading through these chapters, seeing Ichigo, a character who I can see a lot of myself in, he for so long tried to suppress White. He tried to suppress part of himself, a part of himself that was protecting him, helping him, guiding him. It really hit home to me. Storytelling is immortalized through how it affects us as people, and despite how amazing these chapters were to see power-ups and groundbreaking news, I'll forever remember these sequence of chapters and how it made me feel. Hopeful and accepting of my own nature, my own self, my own perceived hollow. This is why I love storytelling. This is why I love Bleach. While Ichigo reforges his blade and undergoes training, all the Shinigami begin training as well. Of those training, Hitsugaya got me really fired up. Despite having his Bankai taken, he refuses to stop progressing. He humbles himself and joins with the lower ranks for basic training with his sword. This moment was so symbolic of his leadership and humility, and subsequently it had my love of Hitsugaya grow even more. Sajin Komamura also sought training under his grandfather, who made Komamura look small due to his sheer vast size, and that's really hard to do. Komamura is giant. His grandfather struck me as nefarious with clouded intentions, and he lamented Sajin for leaving his clan and hiding his face. But Sajin stands here today to seek his clan's teachings. In order to receive these teachings, Sajin must give up his heart, all for the sake of avenging the man who he owes everything to, Old Man Yamamoto. God rest his soul. My favorite group training is Renji and Rukia. The training methods within the Royal Palace are so unique, but clearly if Squad Zero is utilizing these methods, they sure as hell better work well. Of the Squad Zero, Ichibi stuck out to me with his excited nature, and given his title of the Eyeball Monk, his true ability is that he can discern the true name of things, which leads Renji to understand his Zanpakuto's true name, which only means further power-ups for our characters. The development for the Squad Zero members outside of Yumiya is fairly minimal, but I have high hopes we'll get to see them further in action. The Shinigami aren't the only ones at work. The Sternritter are gathered by Yhwach, and Yhwach announces the appointment of Uryu as his successor, which struck me immediately as suspicious. A man like Yhwach likely wants to live forever, and appointing a successor subsequently wouldn't make much sense. But as Jugo later explains, this action draws all the eyes to Uryu, and now he's unable to make any move that could be treacherous. This stirs conflict as anticipated, and for a brief moment, we almost see Bosby versus Jugo, who seems to be second in command for the Quincy. The anticipation for Jugo fighting is immense, his design is incredible, and he seems cold and methodical. My god, I cannot wait. Sternritter D calls Jugo the future emperor, which foreshadows a potential usurper within the ranks, and I'm really curious what Jugo's true motive is. Yhwach informs Uryu that within Uryu there is something he possesses that surpasses his own power, but I imagine he likely wants to take this very power from Uryu. Both Uryu and Ichigo are getting tons of hype surrounding their power levels, and I'm awaiting a fight with both of them against Yhwach. Among the Quincy's, a scene I found both funny and devilish was Bambietta telling one of the Vonderreich she needs some special relief, implying a sexual undertone, and she brings him to her room to seemingly reveal her breast and split the man in two. This is a Tinder date gone horribly wrong. The group of 5 female Sternritters seems so jolly in nature and sweet, but that's what makes them so terrifying. They seem delighted to kill, and they ooze bloodlust. With all the preparations on both sides, it seemed like it would likely be a while before the battle took place, but Kubo follows his methodology of fast-paced storytelling, and soon the invasion begins. Invasion is a bit of a misnomer, however. The Quincy were always there to begin with, lurking in the shadows, and the Sarate begins to disappear, revealing the white hidden empire of the Quincy. This scene was brutal. Everything we knew as a Sarate now completely gone, the advantages of fighting on home ground are dissipated, and true bloodshed begins. Of the old song of the sealed Quincy, over 900 years he shall recover his heartbeat, over 90 years his intellect, over 9 his power, and over 9 days he shall recover the world. This line is so hard, and my god, this really does feel like the final arc. A lot of fights then ensue and are set up, and of those set up are Shunsui and Jugo, and they seem directly at odds with one another, but sadly we're just teased through the sequence of chapters of the fights to come for them. However, given the Quincy's operate out of the shadows and Shunsui's Shikai ability is shadow related, perhaps his Bankai could utilize these shadows even further. There's then a hilarious scene with Mayuri's preparations, and Mayuri comes out as a literal son. As a character, he never ceases to make me smile with his antics. The fight sequences all take place and follow a central pattern, with Captain facing off versus the Sternritter who stole their Bankai. The only fight that doesn't follow this scheme is at first Toshiro and Rangiku, where they were briefly fighting Bosby, and I believe the intent here is to build up the immense power Bosby possesses for a future fight, because the rest of the Sternritter and these sequences of fights are tough, but not nearly on the same level as Bosby. With the captains losing their Bankai, the captains were forced to evolve and grow stronger through their training, and I really do enjoy the storytelling element. It allows our cast of characters to grow stronger without some hard-to-believe power-up. There's a ton of reliance on Bankais in the story, and without them, briefly, it enables the further understanding of one's own power, which makes for the fights to be even better. Soifon demonstrates this the best. Her power-up was beautiful, with an aura that mirrors wings of an angel. She now finally has full control and full power over Shunko. Despite their new power-ups, however, our heroes lose in the face of such great powers of the Sternritters. But thank God our story has a literal genius within it, that being Kisuke Urahara. Urahara developed the shadow penetration drugs, and he observed that in Hueco Mundo none of the Espada had their Resurrection taken. And this led him to understand that Quincy's are unable, or it'd be a detriment to steal the Resurrection of a Hollow. Hollows and Quincy's are direct opposites to each other, and they're unable to exist as counterparts. Quincy's have no natural resistance to a Hollow's power, which makes my understanding of Quincy's desire to eradicate them all the more clear and fleshed out. They're the biggest threat to Quincy. The continual theme of light and dark is so apparent with the Quincy and Shinigami, and it mirrors the biblical elements Bleach has. Yhwach's name is literally directly from Yahweh, the Hebrew name for God, and also Jehovah. The Quincy with their angelic abilities and appearance, their opposition to darkness within the Hollows, and then the Shinigami act as almost fallen angels, and all these parallels to theology leads me to a theory we'll later get to about Yhwach. With these shadow penetration drugs now distributed, the Bankais return to the captains who had theirs stolen, and it turns the tide of battle for the captains just defeated, and they now battle on par with their enemies. With the absence of the Bankais, it did enable the Sternritter to use their Vol standing though. My favorite Vol stand dig thus far has been Bambietta's. Her appearance is beautiful, and with her angel wings she's utterly terrifying. Not to mention that scene earlier. Her power is that she can turn anything her spirit particles touch into a bomb, which seems pretty busted in terms of strength, and this fight did have me completely unsure who'd truly come out on top. Typically in storytelling, when heroes get their powers restored, it bodes for a quick and triumphant victory. I love how Kubo utilized the Volstad digs to make these already scary characters with stolen Bankai even more powerful without them. Bambietta fights against Komamura and Shinji, but Komamura has the spotlight this fight and a ton of development. Sajin's transformation to a human form through his clan's secret technique was so surprising because we get a brief backstory on the curse their clan was given, and it fleshes out why Komamura is in fact not human but still able to talk. His Bankai and appearance now have both changed, and it's incredible. Previously, Komamura was a character I liked, but the development here has pushed him further up in my rankings. Loving both Bambietta and Komamura, it was hard for me to be okay with either of them losing badly, but I soon started to get death flags for Komamura. He cast his very life aside for this power, the power to avenge Yamamoto. These sequence of panels was so beautiful. Komamura embodies the spirit of heroism and self-sacrifice within battle, but these panels soon turn dark. His grandfather relishes in this moment and acknowledges his pride within Sajin, but not for good reason. He has pride in Sajin for doing the very thing he shamed Tosen for enacting, that being revenge. Revenge being the true nature of his clan, and for the price of this revenge, Sajin becomes completely an animal. I was upset at this moment. The villainy of the grandfather seems kind of out of nowhere given his short time within the story, but most importantly, although he's not dead, he's no longer able to function as himself, as a captain of the Godei 13. At this current point, he hasn't returned back to his normal form, but I have a lingering suspicion he'll never truly return. Ichigo during this time finishes his training and descends from the royal palace, and Ichibi acknowledges him now as a true Shinigami. The anticipation is unreal. While even more fights take place, we anticipate his arrival fervently. We're again blue-balled with Jugo and Shunsui as Jugo returns back to the palace for the execution of the Stern Ritter who were defeated, and the Quincy don't seem much for sentimentality, which again is contradictory to their appearance as regal and angelic, rather they're heartless. One of the next fights takes place with the arrival of Rukia and Renji, and it was one I had to seriously laugh at and not take too seriously. Renji fights against Superstar Mask Demasculine. Okay, seriously, this fight was hysterical, and I couldn't believe I was reading this after what just happened, given the dark element of what we previously read, and not only that, I wanted Rukia to fight so badly, but I had to watch Renji and Superstar duke it out first. Superstar gains his power through the cheering of his fan James, and their dynamic was perfect. I rooted for James because he seems so childlike and a true WWE fan, and he reminds me of one of my childhood friends. I imagine Kubo during this time was watching WWE, enjoying himself, and he got inspired for this Stern Ritter, but he really is no joke. He bodies two captains by the time Renji actually engages him in battle. His fighting style is more brute force than anything, and his persona being that of a superstar, he continually remarks Renji as a villainous coward, and Renji feeds into this notion. Despite Superstar continually powering up, Renji does the same and he shows the true form and true name of his Bankai, and he defeats Superstar and James brutally. The power-ups from the Royal Palace are no joke, and clearly Renji is above typical captain level now, which drives even more excitement towards Ichigo's arrival. With understanding the true nature of the Zanpakuto, it seems like it's an elevated Bankai, or rather a true Bankai, and I really enjoy this level of power-up. After James and Superstar's defeat, we're shown a young baby, and I almost lost my mind thinking it was James as a baby because I so wanted that fight to be concluded. This baby, unable to use its senses and completely helpless, was treated like a treasure. When people interacted with this child, they'd gain something they lacked, a true miracle baby. This baby could share out parts of his own soul. I soon realized just who this baby was. The only Quincy to be able to share out his power and not absorb the power around them. Those who received fragments of the baby's soul, their wounds would soon heal, and the knowledge and abilities they learned and awakened were imprinted upon the fragments of the baby's soul, and when they died, all these fragments would return to the child. Subsequently, the baby was no longer helpless. With more and more people receiving his soul and dying short after, this prolonged the baby's life and allowed him to grow and live. The people named him after the god they worshipped, Yhwach, which can be translated directly to Yahweh or Jehovah, the very name of Jesus Christ in Christianity, and it's really important for this theory I derive. Yhwach's power is finally explained, although I want even more detail. It seems everyone who is given a piece of his soul has their power taken by Yhwach upon their death, which means that even if our heroes are winning this battle and kill the Stern Ritter, their powers just return to Yhwach, making them far more powerful. The most effective way to share his soul he learned was to engrave letters on their soul to share part of his soul more deeply, and now Uryu has this gained power, but at the cost of potentially losing his powers to Yhwach when he dies. Jugo, knowing that Uryu was likely a traitor, informs Uryu of this, and slowly Uryu begins to realize that his quest for avenging his mother will be futile. What's even more terrifying is that those who his soul has come in contact with have their souls given to Yhwach after their death, so both Shinigami and Quincy in this battle only serve to strengthen Yhwach, making him, in terms of power, the strongest villain we've seen by a long shot. Damn it, man, can someone bust out Aizen already? Things are about to get out of hand. What I found slightly confusing is that I'm unsure if Yhwach also gains the memories of every individual whose soul returns to him. I understand he gains the knowledge and experience of these individuals, but if one of the Stern Ritter fought against a captain and died in the process, would the memories of the captain's abilities and fighting style now be understood by Yhwach as well? If so, that seems far too powerful. It also explains how he's been able to live so long. The process of others dying enables him to live indefinitely, and despite Yhwach hating conflict, that's the only way in which he can sustain life. Quite ironic, but then again, Yhwach doesn't seem to be one to tell the truth. The theory that dawned on me while reading through this, it made me think back to my school years of going to a Christian school. Earlier, we brought up the biblical lore that Quincy, Shinigami, and Hollows possess, that Quincy are heavenly and they're directly opposed to darkness, but the Shinigami acting as fallen angels don't have the same hatred and desire to eradicate Hollows. I dove further into this biblical story. Yhwach, who shares his soul with all around him, inciting miracles, having the very same name translated to Jesus and God, it dawned on me that the ability he possesses is exactly what I'd always imagined the ability of the Soul King to have. To share out his soul, to give power to those around him, to serve as the god of the story, which is what Yhwach aims to do. Yhwach serves as Jesus, so I speculate, given all the biblical lore, that he's the son of God. Hell, he quite literally tells his stern ridders who we can view as disciples to drink his blood. Although Jesus does it metaphorically, the symbolism has so much overlap. God being the Soul King. Again, this is a theory, but they likely had stark differences in ideology, causing Yhwach to fall from heaven and bolster the Quincy for the Quincy to eventually ascend to heaven, that being the royal palace, and usurp the Soul King, his father. I know this sounds pretty crazy, but all the religious schooling from my grade years gives me a biased view when it comes to these biblical parallelisms that are shown right in front of our very eyes. All this information and theorization from one single damn chapter. Hats off to Kubo, and I wish I could have been reading it weekly at the time to see how crazy Reddit was going. One of the fights I have awaited this entire arc finally takes place after this chapter. As you know, Rukia is my favorite character within this story, and with her new implied power-ups, I couldn't have been more excited. Can we take a second to acknowledge how drippy Rukia looks? Truly an S-tier character design. Another character with great design for the role is Aznot, and Aznot, looking straight out of the Grudge movies, arrives and presents a demonic and horrifying presence and dialogue, lamenting how lonely he is without Sinbone Zakura. Aznot releases spikes of spirit energy that once hitting a surface begin to ooze, and when it comes in contact with someone, they're full of fear. Aznot believing he bested Rukia and believing she is no longer able to move, Rukia pulls off such a badass line of asking Aznot what he fears, if he fears realizing his ability doesn't work. Rukia in these panels looks like the villain, and I'm all here for it. The man who fatally wounded her brother is a perfect matchup for her to be the dark and unforgiving Soul Reaper she is. This battle is personal. The reason she isn't affected by this fear is due to the true nature of her Sode no Shiroyuki, and this is what I was waiting for. Both Renji, Ichigo, and Rukia all now know their true Zanpakuto. There's an interesting dialogue regarding fear being the most primitive and unwavering feelings. That everyone can understand fear, no one is immune to it, and everyone can answer why they feel fear. As opposed to comfort, it's a lot easier to quantify fear. Fear leads to death, which is why creatures inherently have this emotion, this feeling, the feelings of self-preservation. This fear is necessary to survive. So Aznot is perplexed as to how she isn't affected by this very primitive emotion. Rukia reveals that he's right about fear. It's needed to live, but she isn't alive. Rukia isn't playing any damn games. Her Sode no Shiroyuki doesn't just emit cold, it brings her body below freezing, making her temporarily dead, thereby having immunity to fear. She then seemingly one-shots Aznot and freezes him completely solid. Our Ice Princess has such a cool ability. I wish I was recording my reactions to reading these chapters because I was geeking out so hard, and these were truly some of my favorite chapters of this arc so far. Rukia's new power is balanced due to the limitations it presents. It's one in which, if used incorrectly, can cost her her own life, and she can't use the power indefinitely. This fight follows the typical narrative within these past fights, with our hero winning temporarily only for the foe to power up once more. Aznot's power up looks genuinely horrific, and Kubo must have been watching horror films because this is straight out of a horror movie. His power is even more terrifying because rather than having his spirit energy spike seep into Rukia, all she has to do to be immobilized by him is look at him. When looking at him, his ability causes her nerves to freeze in fear, which is really fitting for this fight, and he traps Rukia in a terrifying space with eyes everywhere. To freeze in fear and to literally freeze, both immobilize, and it's a really cool parallel. Where Rukia seems to be almost defeated, none other than Byakuya arrives for a phenomenal Big Brother moment. Despite Aznot's immense and hack's power, Byakuya brushes it aside with merely his Shikai that after losing his Bankai and learning the true nature of his blade, he powered up exponentially, and now his Shikai is so much stronger. The Byakuya Big Brother redemption towards Rukia then finally comes full circle. He tells her she's become strong. The insecurity she had towards not being enough for her big brother is dissipated. Byakuya acknowledges her strength, how much she's grown, and he instills in Rukia the confidence to fight, to eliminate fear, to lose this insecurity. He does what an older sibling should do, and he lifts up Rukia's spirit. Rukia then releases her Bankai, a moment I had awaited for an extremely long time. With her Bankai, Asnot is defeated in his grotesque and giant form almost instantaneously. Rukia with the most elegant and beautiful Bankai versus the most ugly and horrific character in the story is a great juxtaposition. I can't get over how great Rukia design-wise looks with her Bankai and how immensely strong it is. Ichigo and her Bankai present another yin and yang within this story. Ichigo with a dark theme, dark colors and an ominous aura, and then Rukia with the opposite, a light and angelic theme. The dichotomy for them is perfect. My wish truly did come true with Rukia's Bankai, and it blew my expectations out of the water, and with this fight it allowed for the perfect resolution to Byakuya's character arc as an older brother to our Rukia. You would think with all these fights the story would slow down, but it doesn't. We're presented with Gremmy, who has by far the most hacks ability in the story, being the power of imagination, and he attacks both Yachiro and Isane. We've long awaited Yachiro to fight, and she mirrors Kenpachi's animalistic and instinctive fighting style, merely reacting and seeking combat. We even get to see her Shikai that mirrors and copies her moves, and it looks terrifying for a young girl to wield. Despite their fight being short, it was one of the most exciting chapters for Yachiro, and her fighting style was just as I anticipated. Gremmy being able to construct reality based on his mind alone is extremely overpowered, and thank God he didn't utilize it to the full potential due to his arrogance and childish thought process, because he could have soloed essentially anyone in the story. Gremmy does catch 2 quick bodies within Rose and Kensei, and I swear to God these were some of the most casual deaths without much emphasis on losing 2 captains. Gremmy made a large mistake in this fight though, and that is hurting Yachiro, which results in none other than Kenpachi arriving, who we've awaited since his fight with Unohana. What a fool Gremmy is to hurt Kenpachi's lieutenant, and this fight was beyond hype. A monster versus a reality warping twerp, I turned on some hard rock and metal for what transpired. Kenpachi and Gremmy take the stage quite literally due to his power, and while on the stage, Kenpachi's men down below acknowledge they didn't sense his spirit energy until now. Kenpachi, a man previously without control of his Ryatsu, now is able to suppress it and control it, which is terrifying to think of this power up. Now with Zaraki as the true Kenpachi, he's the strongest of the Shinigami, and he can slice through anything. Kenpachi is the brute character archetype done perfectly, and every time he's within the story, I know I'm in for a thrill. Everything Gremmy threw at Kenpachi with the power of his mind, Kenpachi powered through. And I found myself questioning why Gremmy didn't just imagine him dead, but it seems he was actually just enjoying the fight. I found it funny that the other Sternmurder decided to get out of harm's way because they acknowledged Gremmy as a lunatic, and that he should have been permanently locked up due to his power and mind being so warped. Gremmy, for the first time in his life, truly desires to win and destroy an opponent, and there should be no other way to fight when fighting Kenpachi, who desires the same. As a result, he summons a literal damn meteor that would easily destroy the entire Serete, but Gremmy being a madman didn't care, and I love that he has the mind of a child just wanting to win at any cost, and it fits his ability with his imagination being the key part of his strength. This meteor evokes Kenpachi's Shikai within Nozarashi, and despite how fantastic this cleaver looks on Kenpachi, in the panels right after he calls out to his blade, we see Yachiro look up, and we see the flashback when she was a nameless child and she met a nameless man. That her and Kenpachi were always together, and I feared my initial theory of her being part of his sword that was foreshadowed right after the Unohana fight. This theory regarding her being the spirit of the sword I threw to the wayside when I saw her use her Shikai, so this moment shocked me. I don't want Yachiro to disappear. Kenpachi then cuts the damn meteor in half, which is one of the most Chad actions of the story so far, and despite Gremmy literally putting him in space and causing an explosion on his own body, Kenpachi survives, still standing like the monster he is. The monster that is accentuated by Gremmy believing him to be so. Gremmy is inevitably defeated by his own mind, desiring to become stronger than Kenpachi, however without the body to support this immense strength. This immense strength that Kenpachi has. Only Kenpachi can stay alive and function with this sheer energy, this sheer force. He is the true Kenpachi. Gremmy's appearance as a brain and the body always being a part of his imagination, it made sense, and it reminded me a lot of the brain we saw within Espada number 9 controlling a huge body. This fight was fantastic, but at the end of it I felt uneasy. Kenpachi asked where Yachiro was, and no one knew. Her spirit energy was now undetectable. Kenpachi, perturbed for the first time visibly within the story, he asks his men to look for her, to find her at any cost. This led to me having feelings of fear of her never truly coming back. Our adorable Yachiro, who stood by Kenny's side for as long as we can remember. In the process of searching for her, the Sternmurder chose to ambush Kenny and his men right after this immense and damaging fight. They do so like cowards. The 4 who attack him are the remaining female posse of Sternmurder, who are a fearsome group. Relishing in battle and bloodshed, their looks are far deceiving. They're monsters in the appearance of cute and beautiful girls. When all hope seems lost with Kenpachi being hit when he's down, and everybody on the battlefield rushing to save Kenpachi, the individual who truly turns the tide of battle. A vast spirit, it's felt by everybody. Falling from the sky in perfect timing is our hero. Ichigo Kurosaki now arrives to the battlefield to save a man no one ever thought would need saving. things are about to get even more interesting. Never did I think we'd get a moment where Ichigo was in the position to save Kenpachi, but to be fair, Kenpachi literally had to fight against imagination and then a group of minimally clad women. I wouldn't do as well as he did. The fights have been non-stop and Kubo doesn't seem to be slowing down. This fast-paced storytelling, Kubo thrives in it, but I have read that he had pressure to wrap up the series and was suffering through injury, all while writing and drawing for this arc. So I can see elements of this fast pace. The death of the two visored captains felt brushed to the side, and I'd love to see more development for each captain, but despite this, he has a god-tier skill of developing characters and storylines with immense emotional elements and a minimal number of chapters. Hell, look at Masaki and how well she's written despite appearing primarily just in the flashback. I did read in the comments on the last video that there will likely be filler that fleshes out more of these plot points that were rushed, which makes the anticipation for the anime returning all the more intense. The 3 chapters within this part of the arc within The Blade and Me and The Blade is Me are some of my favorite chapters of Bleach, and the emotional connection I had to these chapters truly affected me on a personal level, which is what I believe makes a story feel far more than just a piece of fiction. In some of the recent turbulence of my life, this beautiful and intricate story has made me feel in a time where I needed it most. This part of the arc we also got to see the Bankai of my favorite character within the story within Rukia, and it was better than I could have ever imagined. It is by far the most beautiful Bankai, and what excites me is that there's so many more Bankais to be unveiled. Kenpachi, Urahara, Shunzui, Byakuya's newfound Bankai, and now Ichigo. They've all yet to unveil their true power, and you best believe I have high expectations. The 1,000-Year Blood War continues to show why it's peak storytelling, and I'm left wondering what's next. What are the unrevealed Bankais? What is Yhwach's true motive? How many of our allies will die, and just how strong is Ichigo after his training? I guess we'll have to find out next time. If you stuck around this long, please do consider dropping a subscription because we are so close to 1,000 and that's been a lifelong goal of my career throughout YouTube. I love this story and I'm already itching to dive into the next part of the 1,000-Year Blood War. Similarly to what Rukia said to Ichigo, this isn't goodbye, but see you later. As always, be greedier.